This Sunday on Capital Connection, 8 experts evaluate the graduated income tax. It's the biggest question on the ballot in Illinois this November and could alter the arc of the state's finances forever. 4 panels, 8 perspectives. We hear from business and labor, conservative and liberal, Republican and Democrat, women and people of color. In the first wide-ranging forum of its kind, we bring you the best arguments for and against abolishing the state's flat income tax to adopt a graduated rate structure, what it means, what's at stake, and what it would cost you. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell. Illinois decides whether or not to adopt a graduated income tax rate structure and change the state's constitution to abolish a flat tax 1 week from Tuesday. We have 8 guests on 4 panels this week. You'll hear one guest arguing for the idea, the other against in each of those 4 panels. We begin with our elected officials. Representative Avery Bourne, a Republican, and Representative Carol Ammons, a Democrat, joining us remotely from Champaign. Representative Bourne, Illinois' financial woes are well documented. Pension debt is rising and eating into the state's available resources and spending. The state hovers above junk bond status even now, and the coronavirus, as you know, blew a massive hole in our budget as we have it. How would you describe the state's current economic situation?
I think that Illinois' economic situation is dire. I hear this from constituents often. Illinois is broke. And this is absolutely the last and worst time that Illinois should be proposing or pushing another income tax increase. We've seen that twice over the last decade, and we haven't seen a vast improvement in Illinois' economic condition. So we have to have real structural changes and reforms that aren't an income tax increase, particularly during a pandemic.
House Republican leader Jim Durkin, though, did say that the tax increase in 2017 helped to balance the budget or bring the budget into clearer balance. It seems that he believes that that tax increase was necessary.
Well, he voted against it. I voted against it. If we don't get our spending under control and this out of control, insatiable appetite of spending in Springfield isn't brought into balance with the tax dollars that we're bringing in, we're never going to have an economic condition that supports job growth and people staying here. And we continue to see out of balance budgets, even after these tax increases over the last decade.
I'm going to turn to Representative Ammons in a moment, but to follow up on that thought quickly, where would you cut now? Where is the biggest cut you would make in state spending?
I think it has to be an entire culture shift. We're looking at the biggest budget in state history. The 7% increase in this last budget, I mean, that's the first place to start. We can't have an increased budget in the biggest budget in state history during a pandemic. We have to spend the money that's coming in.
Representative Ammons, Governor Pritzker has ordered state agency heads to identify a range between 5 or 15% in cuts. When he was building his budget, he said 5. Then during the coronavirus, he raised that number and said, look for areas to cut. Some Republicans say that that's evidence enough right there that there is room to make cuts in state spending without raising taxes. How do you respond to that?
You know, what's interesting is that we kind of had a precursor to this idea that we could cut our way out of the budget deficit that we're experiencing. We saw that over 4 years of the Rauner administration, who did exactly that, attempted to cut departments to the bone, actually, where it hurt the people of Illinois gravely. And so what we know doesn't work is actually cutting our way out of this fiscal woes. What I agree with is that there needs to be a culture shift, and the fair tax is the process by which to get to that cultural shift. The millionaires and billionaires have to pay their fair share. So this idea that the middle class and the lower wage earners in the state of Illinois should carry the burden of these cuts that are being proposed, unfortunately, by those who understand and agree with the Rauner kind of idea, that you could cut your way out of this mess has been proven to be a false narrative, and it is the thing that is feeding the lies and the distortions around the fair tax.
Representative Ammons, if the graduated income tax raises $3.4 billion a year, where would you like to spend that money?
Oh, wow, what a great question. I would love to spend that money around education that is supposed to be the great equalizer. But because we've cut higher education for the last 20 years, we've not found that equal level of funding that would be necessary to fund higher education K through 12. And what I would love to see is preschool for all children. And so we're not going to get there by a flat tax means. We've seen that fail across the country. And we also know that the General Assembly, who could possibly raise taxes without the fair tax, so that's the truth. We could already raise taxes if we so chose, but that is not where we're trying to go. What we're trying to say to the people of Illinois is that it is about time that the millionaires and billionaires in our state who live on the Gold Coast, who don't have a worry about paying the increased motor fuel tax, they don't have to worry about increased cost of food or rent, they should help us level out not only the playing field, but they should pay their fair share so that we can provide the services necessary to the people of Illinois.
Representative, as voters evaluate this question, they also have to evaluate the question of trust with lawmakers in state government. Illinois before, when changing the Constitution, put a lockbox in place to say that gas taxes would go towards transportation projects only. In Colorado, when voters were asked to change their constitution to a progressive tax, the legislature there said they were only going to pledge all of that new revenue toward education only. Springfield didn't do that. Springfield put that money right into the general revenue fund. Those funds could go really anywhere. Why should voters trust elected officials in Springfield with that kind of money now?
You know, what's interesting is that for the last 40 years, there have been all kind of right-wing think tanks who've been selling to the American people that you just can't trust government. And so anytime we have an actual opportunity to provide a solution to something, they go back on their 40-year engine that they've been feeding with the Koch brothers and all of the prosperity for America, ideas that you just can't trust your elected officials. What we are saying, and what I have said for all of my term in Springfield, is not only will I fight for the middle class and the lower wage earners in our state, but we will make sure that once this money is provided and made available, as we are doing during COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to put that money to those most vulnerable, to our small businesses, which has been done in this crisis that we're in. We know that flat tax system is never going to give not just our General Assembly an opportunity to start really paying down the back debt, but future General Assemblies will never be able to pay down this back debt if we don't restructure our tax system. And this is the opportunity that we have to do it.
Representative Bourne, you expressed an interest in cutting taxes, but right now it's true. The state constitution prevents you from cutting taxes for everyone who makes less than, say, $100,000 a year. You don't have that option. To cut those taxes, you'd have to cut everyone's at once. What's wrong with having that option?
You know, I think that it gets to the goal of what this amendment is. If this amendment's goal was to provide tax relief for Illinoisans, they could have baked that in. They could have put the rates in. They could have said that it has to have lower taxes on those under a certain income level, and it doesn't say that. There are ways right now that we have tax relief for those who are middle class. We have the earned income tax credit. We have other things in our tax code to give people who make less an advantage in the tax code. You know, it gets exactly as you said to the issue of trust. The goal of this amendment is to raise taxes. It's to bring in more revenue. It is to restructure it so it's easier for lawmakers to raise more income taxes, period. If this was about saving money for the middle class taxpayers, they could have done that in the amendment, and they chose not to.
I suppose it's still objectively true, though, that you would not have that option if a flat tax stays in place. You would just not have I guess, why wouldn't you want an option to cut taxes for the overwhelming majority of people if it wouldn't significantly damage the state's finances?
We have the opportunity now to provide tax relief. It starts with growing the economy, so we grow the tax base so there's a lower tax burden on everyone. It should be about economic growth. It should be about reining in spending so we don't have these annual huge deficits that will push up taxes in the future. So it talks in the amendment about one thing, what's going to happen is going to be increased taxes on everyone, and that's a dangerous thing to open up in the Constitution.
Representative Ammons, you heard her there say that it could raise taxes on everyone down the road, and Republicans have warned that once the legislature has this power, they could be tempted to tinker or raise taxes on the middle class at some point. I want to ask you to speak for all of your colleagues in the legislature, but for yourself, would you ever vote to raise taxes higher than 4.95%, where it is today, on the middle class?
You know, I have not agreed at all with raising the taxes on the middle class, which is why I agree with the fair tax and why it should pass. 97% of taxpayers will pay the same or less, and this is important. Let me go back to something that my colleague said. The IGPA here at the University of Illinois did a study on this very issue, assuming that if the legislature is given the opportunity to raise taxes, then we will just go wild and crazy raising taxes. If you look at all of the 33 to 35 other states that have graduated income tax structures, according to IGPA, the Illinois income tax structure that was studied by 4 U of I scholars demonstrated very clearly that those states that currently have the ability to do what my colleague is arguing is that we're just going to raise taxes all over the board. There is no evidence at all under the current structure that legislatures across this country, whether they're Republican controlled or democratically controlled, go wild and crazy with raising people's taxes. As a matter of fact, their study showed that in 20 years, most of those states with graduated income taxes didn't raise those at all. And so what is the hyperbole here, which is quite interesting, is that those of us who are simply working class people, we're all in the middle class, are trying to protect the wealthy in the similar way that they tried to do under the Roosevelt administration during the New Deal. That the wealthy who needed to pay their fair share to help us get out of one of the greatest crises in American history, they pay their fair share. And this structure that we're asking the people of Illinois to vote yes on, this structure is going to allow the rich and the wealthy to pay their fair share. That is the bottom line here. And no evidence has been presented that 97% of the people won't save on their taxes. That has not been done by anyone. What has been presented is the attempt to undermine democracy and the attempt to make it appear as if the General Assembly, who already has the ability to raise taxes in a various ways, which I vote against fee increases. I didn't vote for the motor fuel tax because I thought it was too high. So there are many, many ways that we can put checks and balances in place to ensure that the legislature does appropriately by way of the fair tax structure, the progressive tax structure. We understand that it is possible for us to get out of this rut, and this is how we're going to be able to do it, with the support of the taxpayers.
Representative Ammons, Governor Pritzker and his administration have already articulated that if this does not pass and they don't have the revenue they need in this graduated income tax, that the next step would be raising taxes on everyone through the flat tax. We know that the reality of this, the polling shows us it's close. It might fail. It might not pass. If Governor Pritzker comes to the legislature and says, well, this is what we've got to do. We've got to raise taxes on everyone because we have to have more revenue. How do you vote?
You know, I do hope that the people of Illinois can see through all the lies and distortions. We have to change this structure. Everyone knows it. The wealthy must pay their fair share, because the alternative will take us back to the Ron-era administration, where we saw the attempt to cut your way out of a fiscal crisis. That means for me in Champaign-Urbana and our university and our hospitals that we will be forced to look at cuts to the degree of 20 to 25%. That is an enormous amount of job loss. That's an enormous amount of revenue loss in the state budget, and everyone will be impacted. And so I don't believe that we can cut our way out of this. I don't believe that we can cut crucial services. I saw what that looked like when Rauner was the governor, and I saw the silence of my Republican colleagues while we almost went completely over the cliff. And so I'm suggesting today that we cannot look at a across-the-board increase on the taxpayers, because that definitely spells a greater disaster than what we are experiencing right now under COVID and what we experienced under Rauner.
And Representative Bourne, if you oppose the graduated income tax, but the net result is that the legislature raises the taxes on everyone, how is that a win?
It's not, and I don't need a study of other states that might have a graduated income tax. We know from experience, and voters know from experience, that Illinois politicians raise taxes. This is proof of it. They've done it for years, and they've even said if this doesn't pass, they just want another income tax increase anyway. So I don't need that study. I don't need people saying that other states are doing this differently. Voters know, I know, we know. The goal of this is raising income taxes one way or the other.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We have much more of this discussion and the full 4 panels with 8 guests up online. You can see that on our website. Representative Ammons joining us from Champaign, thank you for joining us. And Representative Bourne, thank you as well.
Thank you.
When we come back, top voices from business and labor, how the graduated income tax might impact workers and their employers. That's next.